Okay, this is chapter 19, lecture A. This is the 2020 version of this. There will be the other version will be posted as well. You can listen to that. I'm updating this lecture, at least A, because it will be good. I have a lot more knowledge on the Great War and fought from the perspective of what happened. I've got to see a lot of things happen the last year visiting World War I battlefield. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in more detail today. So, Save for Democracy, Chapter 19. The focus questions: what ways did the progressive presidents promote the expansion of American power overseas? How did the United States get involved in World War I? How did the United States mobilize resources and public opinion for the war effort? How did the war affect race relations in the United States? And why was 1919 such a watershed year for the United States and the world? And as a side note, on World War I, I will probably post a separate slideshow that will show you my travels to World War I battlefields where the Americans fought. I'll probably post that up, and I might actually do a lecture on that just a little bit for some extra context that will be educational and good for you to understand. Okay, introduction. 1902, W.T. Sheed published a short volume with the arresting title, The Americanization of the World. He predicted that the United States would emerge as the greatest of world powers. He believed America's influence to be through pursuit of wealth and the spread of American culture. This is 1902. This does not happen after 1919 or World War I, but really after World War II. Those of you who've taken early American history know that 1945, America emerges as the predominant world power along with the Soviet Union. But for the next 20, 30 years, American influence greatly expanded and influenced much of the world. Steed's publication in 1902, the way he articulated it, he's almost like a prophet. He figured it out that the United States would emerge as the world power, and they would do it through their economic might and the influence and pursuit of wealth. Spanish-American impact and the Panama Canal will be felt. This is where we start to see this impact and the spread of wealth. But Steed is things haven't happened yet, so some people are not buying it. America is not considered a world power even after the Spanish-American War. That will come after World War I. Now, liberal internationalism, conviction that economic and political progress went hand in hand, Wilson's foreign policy concept. We're going to see that the American way of life, this is going to be for the first point where we're going to try to say we need to take democracy, capitalism around the world. And that's what Wilson's going to use in his foreign policy. Now, an era of intervention. He's not the only one that thought this. Progressive presidents, so when we say progressive presidents, once again, this is an era of intervention, slide number, I guess it's number 1, but it's 2. Progressive presidents are always going to be in this order: Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. Now, progressive presidents were not reluctant to project American power outside the country's borders. I took the canal. Teddy Roosevelt became the most active international diplomacy initially. He negotiated settlement of the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, and I've just been listening to a thing on that. This Russo-Japanese War was significant. It's kind of like a little Podok peon, no one's ever heard of boxer knocking out Mike Tyson, or I just went blank on who's the really good boxer.
Muhammad Ali.
No, modern one.
Merriweather.
Someone knocking, like some no name, going up and knocking out Merriweather. And so when Japan beats Russia in this war, it's significant. Roosevelt gets involved, trying to increase America's influence around the world, which he does. He had this quote: "Speak softly and carry a big stick," meaning you're slow to speak, you're slow to analyze everything, meaning you engage it, but you back up whatever you say. And Roosevelt really embodied that, and I mean, it really goes with his personality. TR was convinced that a canal across the Isthmus of Panama would facilitate the movement of naval and commercial vessels between the two oceans, between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And if you look at a world map, realizing that before the Panama Canal, it would take a month or more to go around South America to get to the east coast or west coast of the United States, or east coast if you're going vice versa. So you had to traverse that, and sometimes that was dangerous weather. Roosevelt realized, hey, we build this canal, we can cut shipping costs, we can open up the whole world to quicker travel. And this is in the age of when people realized navies was how you won world support. So He supported the Panamanian conspirators and the rebellion to create a new country once independence was established. So we basically support indirectly a revolution that occurs, or a rebellion that occurs in Panama. We will recognize this new independent government. We'll sign a treaty giving the United States both the right to construction and operate the canal and sovereignty over the Panama zone. Now, the other thing about this, we will agree to give it back later on. Though it will come a little bit later. It's a huge feat of engineering. It helps Panama, it helps us. It completed in 1914, reduced the sea voyage between the east and west coast by 8,000 miles. That's like going back and forth across the United States twice. That's pretty significant. Now, Jimmy Carter, though, will sign a deal in the 70s. I alluded to this earlier, to give it the control back by 2000, which now Panama Canal is in the control of the Panamanian government. But you can see here, as this international, or this area of intervention, we insert ourselves in two separate incidents. The Japanese-Russo War, or Russo-Japanese War, we were not involved with. And Panama, we had really no concern with. But the one thing that Roosevelt will use here that we often don't think about is the Monroe Doctrine, which is we are concerned with what happens in the Americas. Now, if you look at the map here on the slide power, the power deck that I've given you, or the slideshow, you can really see that the Panama Canal is not that long in the grand scheme of things, but the canal itself is significant in its scope and where it's going through. If you go up further, the Dominican Republic, there's a lake called, Nicaragua. There's a lake called Lake Nicaragua, which actually is a huge fresh body. There's now even a movement to build a second canal across this isthmus down in South America today. So you can see that this area is a hugely important area as far as trade is concerned. And here's a good picture of the Panama Canal. You can see how wide and deep it is. A cruise liner going through there. Very important for international travel. The Roosevelt Quarterly. A Roosevelt Quarterly held the United States had a right to exercise an international police power in the Western Hemisphere, connected back to that old Monroe Doctrine established in the early 1800s. It's an expansion of that Monroe Pledge to defend the hemisphere from European intervention. Basically, the French had tried to build something there in the late 1800s. It failed. Thus, the United States will come in and pick it up the pieces and finish it. In 1904, Teddy Roosevelt ordered American forces to seize the custom houses of the Dominican Republic to ensure payment of the country's debts to European and American investors. In 1906, he'll dispute troops to Cuba to oversee disputed election. They were made there until 1909. And this is going back to the provisions of the Spanish-American War, of our intervention there to get Cuba's independence, that we could intervene if we ever deemed necessary. Dollar diplomacy will be President Taft's policy. He will, TR's successor, he'll land Marines in Nicaragua to protect a government friendly to American economic interests, to keep them from being losing. Taft emphasized economic investment and loans rather than direct military intervention. So the thing about Taft is he doesn't want to directly commit our forces to American intervention, unlike modern presidents. Now, moral imperialism. This is going to be Wilson's take. Wilson, the son of a preacher, he comes after Taft, brought a missionary zeal and sense of his own, the nation's moral righteousness. America, we are the righteous. We are good. We are wholesome. We need to take not only Americans' way of life, but the gospel, per se, to where we go. He produced more military interventions in Latin America than any other president. I'm not going to go into all of them, but there were several ones. Now, Wilson and Mexico. Mexico becomes the big not necessarily South America, but Latin America influence. In 1911, Francisco Madero overthrew the government of Porfirio Diaz. In 1914, without Wilson's knowledge, U.S. Ambassador Victoriano Huerta assassinated Madero and seized power. So what's going on in Mexico between 1911 and 1914 is a lot of instability. You have coups, you have jockeying for power, which is going to bring a lot of instability. So along your border, you don't like instability along your border. Especially by this point, there's tensions in Europe are going crazy. War drums are pounding louder and louder. And so Wilson's going to be forced to act. Wilson was appalled. He stated he would teach Latin Americans to elect good men. Now, when the Civil War broke out in Mexico, he ordered U.S. troops to Veracruz. U.S. forces treated as invaders and not liberators. Huerta resigned in 1914 and fled the country. So there's a little bit direct military influence here. We're trying to influence the election, trying to get them to elect who we deem good men. We will end up supporting a guy named Canarza. However, What really gets the United States involved in Mexico is Francisco Pancho Villa. He will raid Columbus, New Mexico, killing 17 Americans, and thus he crosses into the U.S. border, bringing this Mexican Civil War to the United States. With Canarza's support, 10,000 troops under the leadership and the command of General John J. Pershing will cross the border to arrest and search for Ponce Villa. Now, within a few days, all the leaders fell victim to assassination, all but Villa. Villa is going to outlive the United States in this regard. He will never be caught. A lot of his people will be caught and killed, but we are running around from 1915 to 1916, 1917, really hunting for Pancho Villa. So American forces are preoccupied with Wilson's moral imperialism here, and we're really trying to influence Mexico. The other thing is, we're concerned about what's going on in our neighbor's backyard. So all this is going on as events in Europe just fall apart. So this is going to lead to America and the Great War I. Sorry, I skipped a couple slides there. I didn't get you all that. This is where, for 2020, I'm going to update a little bit, and I'm going to probably add a separate lecture to World War I here in the coming days. And I'll post that PowerPoint here shortly. But in 1914, June to be specific, a Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austrian-Hungarian Empire. In short, the guy that's murdered is next in line to be king of Austria-Hungary, which had been around for several hundred years now, though it's a failing empire. The king's son, the oldest son, is assassinated. This event set off a chain of events that plunged Europe to the most devastating the world had ever seen. Now, I can't remember the guy off the top of my head. I think it was Prinsep was his name. And I'm not going to test you necessarily on it, who was the person that assassinated, because it's not necessarily American history. But it was named the Black Hand. So this group, this guy was part of Prinsep, I believe it was part of what was called the Black Hand. Now, the Black Hand was a anarchist group that advocated the overthrow of certain groups and all this. It was not a Serbian-backed group necessarily. What this basically terrorist group's going to do by killing it, the Austrian Hungarians are needing to blame someone, so they blame Serbia. This Black Hand's part of Serbia, and it's just going to escalate. And the crazy thing is, the Ferdinand is killed in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's not even Serbia's country. And so what's going to happen is it's going to kick off a bunch of demands by the Austrian-Hungarians. The Serbs cannot meet all these demands. Austrian-Hungarians know this. And it's going to create basically all these alliances that have already been military alliances. What's going to happen is Russia is going to run to the support of Serbia, which is a small little landlocked country who's been vying for positioning in the early 1900s. Russia's going to say, we'll protect the Serbs. We have a common brotherhood. We are like the protector of this. The Germans are going to rush to support Austria-Hungary. The Germans have been jockeying for war. They want to show the world they're the best. And the Ottoman Empire will be drug in to support what we call the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary as well. However, Great Britain refuses to join initially. That is until the Germans, when all these alliances kick off, go into the neutral country of Belgium. Because when Russia goes to war, that brings France into the war, because the French want to stop the Germans' expansion as well. The British stay out until finally when the Germans roll through neutral Belgium to try to get to France quicker. The British will have no choice but to join. And so all this alliance mess is going to create a very, very nasty war that will bog down. Some thought it would be really quick, but there was a strong sense of nationalism across Europe. They thought it would be quick, but the reality it was not. The big reality was the Russians, probably the country that faces the most change after this war besides Germany, because they will, as we learn, will lose the war, is the Russians. The war is going to literally transform the Russian country into a completely different state in 1917-18. We can talk about that later, but basically you're going to have the creation of the Soviet Union, and the Russians are going to go through a drastic change. Now, German forces will quickly overrun Belgium and north of France, settled into a stalemate. 600,000 French and German soldiers perished at the Battle of Verdun alone. I've been to Verdun, It is a very moving place. The ossuary that is there that I've seen has over 180,000 bones, unidentified people that died of Germans and French. Just massive, massive death. This dealt a severe blow to the optimism and self-confidence of Western civilizations. And what you're going to see is this war is really going to bring the question of what is Europe's future? What's the Western civilization's future? And so 1914, 15, and 16, the French, the British, the Russians, the Germans, the Austrian-Hungarians, they're just going to send men and men and men to die. For what? And that's going to become, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why don't we end this war? Now, as all this is going on, the United States is avoided war. Does that mean we don't favor a side? We start to slowly take on the position of the British. We are officially neutral, though. Now, a lot of Americans' ancestors, or immigrants at this point, were of German descent. So you're going to see a very big struggle within the country of who to support. Now, I'm going to leave this lecture probably here. You can listen to the other lectures to pick up some of these key points. But the big thing to understand is we get into how America joined the war. We joined the war reluctantly. We join it because of the blunders the Germans do. Now, Wilson won re-election in 1916 on the premise, I kept us out of the war. But the Germans are going to make a series of blunders that are going to bring the United States into the war. So, not covered in this lecture series. I just kind of wanted to get more into detail of that, the World War I, the scope of stuff. As we get into this war, it's not going to be a positive here in the country. Okay. That's where we're going to end today. Have a great day.